At the beginning of 1980, Todmorden was a little-known West Yorkshire mill town. But before the year's end, the town would be associated with one of the stranger stories in British UFO history.
For something you only read about or seen on television. And suddenly, it's there. If you think of a double-decker bus sideways, that's how big it was.
And he wasn't the sort of person that would suddenly say something, you know, that hadn't happened. So I believed him.
I felt quite safe in the police car. Now if somebody got out of it, I'd be bloody scared.
The story of a young Yorkshire police officer's sighting of an unidentified object became headline news. In all, 6 separate police officers had witnessed strange phenomena that night. But it was Alan Godfrey's story which caught the attention of both the local press and UFO investigators, many of whom descended on Todmorden in the wake of the sighting. In 1980, Jenny Randalls headed British UFO investigation group Bufora. She was born near Todmorden and has written about British UFO sightings for over 35 years.
The Alan Godfrey experience, when it happened, came at the culmination of a whole series of events during the preceding 3 or 4 months that had been occurring in and around that area. They'd been getting stranger and stranger.
After Alan Godfrey's sighting in Todmorden, he claimed to have lost some 30 minutes in time. The only physical evidence of his encounter, a damaged boot and a sketch he'd made at the time. In an attempt to find out more, UFO investigators suggested a radical idea.
And they contacted me and asked me, would I be willing to go under hypnotic regression? I declined straight away. I wasn't sure, you know. I thought, what is hypnotic regression? The only hypnosis I'd ever seen was on television, on a stage, you know, where they make fun of you.
Eventually, Alan Godfrey was persuaded to undergo hypnosis, which was conducted by 2 psychiatrists, Dr. Jaffe and Professor Blair.
They wouldn't tell either of the psychiatrists what the subject matter was. They would only tell them that it was a policeman who they were going to try to regress to a certain time on a certain date to an incident that may or may not have happened.
Mike Sachs, whose interest in UFOs had been sparked by his own experiences the previous year, was present at the sessions.
The atmosphere in the room was absolutely electric as Alan is relating this series of events. All of a sudden, and under hypnosis, he goes and covers his eyes. Then somehow he's floating and he's taken into this room.
I have no recollection whatsoever what went on during that hypnotic regression.
Under hypnosis, Alan Godfrey's claims grew more bizarre. Not only had he witnessed a UFO, he had also come into contact with alien beings. In UFO terminology, he had been abducted. The investigators also discovered a connection to another unsolved local mystery, one they believed could have extraterrestrial origins. 6 months before his UFO sighting, Alan Godfrey and colleague Malcolm Agley had received a call about a body found at a local coal yard.
He received a radio message that found a body at Todmorden railway station, so I attended with PC Alan Godfrey.
Well, someone instinctively tells you there's something not right. You know, you come across dead bodies all the time, it sounds like, but you do. And he was lying on his back, just staring up into the sky.
There's no disturbance of the call, you know, to say how he got there. I just can't explain it at all.
And it was being treated as a crime scene. I think everybody at that stage thought it was a crime. That's how obvious it was. Why would a man climb a stack of coal, lie down on his back on top and die?
The body was that of a Polish émigré named Zygmunt Adamski, a former miner who'd moved to the UK after the Second World War and had settled in Wakefield, 20 miles from where he was found.
To me, I don't think he'd died there. I think he'd been put there. It looked to me as if he had anyway.
The evidence was inconclusive.
You'd expect if somebody either been lying on the belly or climbed up the coal, it'd be covered in coal dust. It'd been raining, it'd stick to him like glue. There was no visual coal on him, on the front of him, anywhere, and either on his face or anything. And he had these black marks that transpired to be burn marks round the back of the head, and there was one at the nape of the neck here, like an open wound, like a blistering wound, and it had had an ointment applied to it.
We just thought it was strange, you know, that he had these injuries and this sort of green ointment, which looked nothing I've seen before at all, you know. It just seemed strange and a bit unnatural, really.
Zygmunt Adamski had gone missing after a shopping trip. There was no suggestion that he'd planned to disappear, and he was known as a loving family man with no obvious enemies. The autopsy confirmed that Adamski had died of a heart attack. Coroner James Turnbull was mystified, not least by the strange substance found on Adamski's burns.
We had the substance analysed, and the toxicologist and the scientists couldn't come up with any answers to what it was, and we came up against a blank at every line of investigation. This was one of the most puzzling cases that I've come across in 25 years. If somebody proved to me that UFOs exist and that there was one around there at that time, and that in some way we could associate it with this case, then perhaps I might say I'd only raise half an eyebrow.
Whatever the truth behind Adamski's death, which remains unsolved, Alan Godfrey's association with it was to turn him into a UFO celebrity. In November 1980, PC Alan Godfrey had witnessed a mysterious object whilst on patrol in Todmorden.
If I'd have got out the car and thrown a brick at it, it would have gone clang. That's how real it was.
Alan Godfrey was also connected to a mysterious death, which remains unsolved after almost 30 years. Zygmunt Adamski had gone missing in June 1980. His body had been found 5 days later, lying on top of a coal heap in Todmorden. At the inquest, Coroner James Turnbull was mystified, recording an open verdict and even suggesting a link with UFOs.
I did nearly 27 years in the police, and it's the one thing that I've never really got to the bottom of, and it is bizarre, and it's always been there at the back of my mind. There's just no explanation for it at all.
Nobody has ever been charged in relation to the death of Zygmunt Adamski, and the strange ointment which covered his burns has never been identified.
To this day, we don't know whether or not there actually is any connection with the Adamski death. The case is still unsolved. They've never found out how his body got onto the top of that coal heap.
Some UFO researchers looked at all the pieces of the puzzle. You know, the fact that it was put on a coal tip, and how did he get there? It's mysterious. And they just jumped to the most massive of conclusions, that, you know, the only explanation must be that he's been abducted by aliens and something's gone wrong.
The Adamski story was picked up by Sunday Mirror journalist John Sheard. Although more used to covering Northern Ireland and the trial of the Yorkshire Ripper, he recognised the opportunity for an exclusive.
I sat down and tried to write it as straight as I could. I didn't want it to sound over-sensational, because it was already a very sensational story. What I didn't know was that when it hit the streets that Sunday, as the front page lead, was the incredible reaction that would happen. I'm talking about literally thousands of letters, hundreds of phone calls. I began to realise that this was a story that, even though I was still a bit iffy about it, had gripped millions of people throughout the world.
John Sheard soon discovered PC Alan Godfrey's involvement with the Adamski case, and the later claims made under hypnosis that he'd been the subject of an alien abduction.